Introduction. On a seemingly ordinary day in March 2018, US-Bangla Flight 211 was on its final approach to Kathmandu's Tribhuvan International Airport. But as the aircraft neared the runway, the situation inside the cockpit took a terrifying turn. Alarms blared. "Too low, pull up," a phrase that strikes fear into any pilot's heart. Outside, thick fog enveloped the mountainous valley, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The runway appeared only at the last possible moment, but the plane was dangerously misaligned, descending too fast and perilously close to the ground. The captain, desperately attempting to correct their course, suddenly lost control. The aircraft veered sharply, flying dangerously close to the domestic terminal and narrowly missing the air traffic control tower. Inside the tower, air traffic controllers froze in terror, while the 71 passengers aboard remained blissfully unaware of the catastrophe unfolding around them. What went wrong? How did a routine flight descend into chaos? This is the story of US-Bangla Flight 211, a tragic incident that shocked the aviation world and raised crucial questions about safety in the skies. The first officer's big day. The day had begun like any other at Hazrat Shah Jalal International Airport in Dhaka, Bangladesh. Among the crew was First Officer Prithula Rashid, a trailblazer as the first female pilot at US-Bangla Airlines. At just 25 years old, she was already making her mark in the aviation industry, having accumulated 390 flight hours, a respectable number for someone so early in their career. This flight, however, was particularly significant for her. She was about to tackle one of the most challenging tasks in aviation, landing at Kathmandu's Tribhuvan International Airport. This airport is notorious among pilots for its difficult approach, as it is nestled in a narrow, bowl-shaped valley surrounded by the towering peaks of the Himalayas. Pilots require special training to navigate this treacherous route, and even experienced aviators find it daunting. To guide First Officer Rashid through this challenging flight was Captain Abid Sultan, a 52-year-old former Bangladesh Air Force pilot with over 22 years of flying experience. Captain Sultan was not just any pilot. He was an instructor for the airline, responsible for training other pilots, and a veteran of the Kathmandu route with over 100 flights into the city. On paper, Captain Sultan seemed the perfect mentor for this flight. However, beneath the surface, something was deeply wrong. As the plane prepared for departure, First Officer Rashid noticed that her captain was unusually agitated. His behavior was erratic. He appeared stressed, short-tempered, and even muttered curses under his breath. This was far from the calm and collected demeanor expected from someone about to tackle one of the most dangerous approaches in aviation. The captain's troubling behavior. Despite his apparent agitation, Captain Sultan's tone would dramatically shift whenever he spoke to First Officer Rashid. He became calm, almost fatherly, offering her reassurance. "Don't be scared," he said. "I'm going to show these people right and left." But this reassurance was tainted with a dark undercurrent. As they taxied for takeoff, Captain Sultan's anger flared again, this time directed at the operations staff. He lashed out over a seemingly trivial issue, his outburst catching everyone off guard. More concerning was his continued erratic behavior as the flight progressed. Captain Sultan began to display signs of severe emotional instability, something that was not just dangerous, but a clear violation of aviation safety protocols. As the plane lifted off and climbed into the sky, Captain Sultan's mental state deteriorated further. He launched into an angry tirade against another young female pilot, Farhat Lamia Khalid, whom he had previously trained. He accused her of filing a complaint against him, questioning his competency, and claimed that this had driven him to the brink. His rant grew more intense, and soon he was openly weeping in the cockpit, a scene that would unsettle any co-pilot, especially one so young and inexperienced as First Officer Rashid. This wasn't just a momentary lapse, it was a sign of something much more dangerous. Captain Sultan had a history of mental health issues. Back in 1993, while serving in the Bangladesh Air Force, he had been removed from active duty after a psychiatric assessment. Although he later passed another evaluation and joined US-Bangla in 2015, it was clear that the psychological scars from his past were far from healed. His behavior in the cockpit was not only erratic, but also a violation of the sterile cockpit rule, which prohibits non-essential conversation during critical phases of flight like takeoff and landing. This rule exists for a reason: to ensure that pilots remain fully focused on the task at hand during the most dangerous parts of a flight. However, on this day, that rule was being blatantly ignored. A dangerous descent. As the flight neared Kathmandu, the weather conditions began to deteriorate rapidly. The sky grew darker, the clouds thicker, and the air turbulence more severe. The approach to Kathmandu was already perilous under the best conditions, but today it would push the crew to their limits. The first officer, eager but nervous, had been looking forward to the challenge. However, she could not have anticipated just how harrowing this experience would become. The cockpit atmosphere was tense, with the captain's erratic behavior casting a shadow over what should have been a routine flight. Captain Sultan, still emotionally unstable, failed to properly brief the approach into Kathmandu. He didn't have the necessary approach charts with him, and instead, he borrowed them from First Officer Rashid. This was a critical mistake. The charts contained vital information: minimum altitudes, headings, and the location of dangerous terrain surrounding the airport. Without them in his possession, Captain Sultan was essentially flying blind, relying on memory rather than precise data. The first officer, still new to the route, was in no position to challenge him, despite noticing several mistakes in his approach briefing. As the plane began its descent, the crew received instructions from Kathmandu approach to hold at a waypoint known as Guras. This waypoint is a key holding point for flights inbound to Tribhuvan International Airport, especially when air traffic is heavy or weather conditions are poor. The first officer, following standard procedures, programmed the hold into the flight management system, expecting to circle for a few minutes before making the final approach. However, just before reaching the waypoint, they were cleared to descend and approach the runway directly, bypassing the hold. In the chaos of the moment, they forgot to remove the hold pattern from the computer, setting the stage for a critical error. A series of mistakes. Captain Sultan, still struggling to maintain focus, lit a cigarette in the cockpit, a blatant violation of safety protocols. Smoking in the cockpit was strictly prohibited, not just because of the health risks, but because it was a serious distraction. As he tried to control the plane with one hand, he accidentally dropped the cigarette on the floor. Distracted, he asked First Officer Rashid to search for it, further diverting their attention from the critical task at hand. Meanwhile, the plane, now on autopilot, began following the programmed hold pattern, turning left when it should have been heading straight for the runway. The air traffic controller noticed the deviation and quickly warned the crew. Captain Sultan, panicked, switched to manual control and attempted to correct the plane's course, but the damage was already done. The weather outside was unforgiving, with strong crosswinds pushing the plane off course. Visibility was poor, and the mountainous terrain of the Kathmandu Valley loomed ominously in the fog. The crew's situational awareness was rapidly deteriorating. They were now flying on a heading that took them further away from the airport, not towards it. The captain, struggling to regain control, made another critical error. He failed to properly configure the landing gear. When the first officer, noticing the oversight, tried to correct him, he dismissed her concerns, insisting that everything was fine. But it wasn't. The landing gear was not down, and the plane was descending dangerously close to the ground. The final moments. As they approached the airport, the air traffic controller, realizing the severity of the situation, cleared the plane to land on any runway. The captain, disoriented and desperate, tried to align the plane with the closest runway, making a series of sharp, erratic turns. The plane was now flying at a steep angle, far too fast for a safe landing. The crew, still unable to see the runway, was completely lost. Then, in a moment of panic, Captain Sultan attempted a last-ditch effort to land the plane on runway 20, even though they had been cleared for runway 02. The plane hurtled towards the ground at an alarming speed. The air traffic controller, watching in horror, canceled the landing clearance, but it was too late. The plane skimmed over the parked aircraft at the domestic terminal, barely missing the control tower. The controllers inside scrambled for cover, bracing for impact. The plane's descent was uncontrollable, and as it touched down, only one of the landing gears made contact with the runway. The plane skidded off course, bounced on the unpaved ground, and then crashed through the airport's perimeter, coming to a devastating halt in a nearby field. Within seconds, a fire erupted, engulfing the aircraft in flames. The aftermath was catastrophic. Both pilots, the 2 cabin crew members, and 47 passengers lost their lives in the crash. Only a handful of passengers, those seated on the right side or at the front of the plane, managed to survive. The tragedy of US-Bangla Flight 211 left a deep scar on the aviation community and raised serious questions about mental health in the cockpit, pilot training, and the importance of strict adherence to safety protocols. The investigation. In the wake of the crash, investigations were launched by aviation authorities in both Bangladesh and Nepal, as well as by international bodies. The findings were as alarming as they were tragic. It became clear that the crash was the result of a series of human errors compounded by a lack of adherence to standard operating procedures. The captain's mental health issues played a significant role in the disaster. His erratic behavior, emotional instability, and failure to follow basic safety protocols were critical factors that led to the crash. The investigation also highlighted serious flaws in the airline's oversight and training programs. Despite his history of mental health problems, Captain Sultan had been allowed to fly without any ongoing psychological support or monitoring. This oversight was not unique to US-Bangla Airlines. It reflected a broader issue within the aviation industry, where mental health is often stigmatized and inadequately addressed. The investigation also revealed that First Officer Rashid, despite being well-trained, was not adequately prepared to handle the extreme pressure and the erratic behavior of her captain during the flight. Another key finding was the failure of the cockpit crew to adhere to the sterile cockpit rule. This rule is in place to ensure that pilots remain fully focused during critical phases of flight, such as takeoff and landing. However, throughout the flight, Captain Sultan engaged in non-essential conversation, rants, and even lit a cigarette, all of which contributed to the loss of focus and situational awareness. This lack of discipline in the cockpit was a significant factor in the sequence of errors that ultimately led to the crash. The human element. One of the most tragic aspects of the US-Bangla Flight 211 disaster is how it underscores the importance of the human element in aviation. Despite all the advanced technology and rigorous training, the success of any flight ultimately depends on the people in the cockpit. When a pilot is not in the right mental state, it can have catastrophic consequences. The crash of Flight 211 is a stark reminder that mental health is just as important as physical health for pilots. The aviation industry must take proactive steps to ensure that pilots have the support they need to deal with the immense pressures of their job. The disaster also highlights the importance of communication and teamwork in the cockpit. In this case, the breakdown in communication between Captain Sultan and First Officer Rashid was a critical factor in the crash. The first officer, despite noticing several red flags, felt unable to challenge her senior officer's decisions. This is a common issue in aviation, where the hierarchical nature of the cockpit can sometimes prevent junior crew members from speaking up, even when they sense something is wrong. This tragedy underscores the need for a culture of openness and mutual respect in the cockpit, where all crew members feel empowered to voice their concerns. Lessons learned. In the aftermath of the crash, there have been calls for significant changes in the way mental health is managed within the aviation industry. Many have argued that pilots should undergo regular psychological evaluations and receive ongoing support throughout their careers. This is especially important given the immense pressures that pilots face, from long hours to the heavy responsibility of ensuring the safety of hundreds of passengers. By addressing mental health proactively, the aviation industry can help prevent tragedies like US-Bangla Flight 211 from happening again. There have also been calls for improved training and oversight within airlines. The investigation into the crash revealed that there were gaps in the training and supervision of the cockpit crew. These gaps allowed a pilot with significant mental health issues to continue flying without adequate support. Moving forward, airlines must ensure that all pilots receive the training, supervision, and support they need to perform their duties safely and effectively. Finally, the crash of Flight 211 has highlighted the importance of strict adherence to safety protocols. The sterile cockpit rule exists for a reason, and when it is not followed, the consequences can be deadly. The aviation industry must reinforce the importance of these rules and ensure that all pilots understand and adhere to them at all times. Conclusion. The story of US-Bangla Flight 211 is a tragic reminder of the fragility of human life and the immense responsibility that pilots bear. It is a story of how a series of small mistakes, compounded by a lack of mental health support and a breakdown in communication, led to a disaster that claimed the lives of 51 people. But it is also a story of how the aviation industry can learn from its mistakes. By addressing the issues highlighted by this tragedy, the industry can improve safety and prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. As the aviation community continues to grapple with the lessons of Flight 211, it is clear that mental health, communication, and strict adherence to safety protocols are critical to ensuring the safety of all who fly. The memory of those who lost their lives in this tragedy should serve as a constant reminder of the importance of these principles. The skies may be vast, but they are not without danger, and it is only through vigilance, support, and teamwork that we can ensure they remain safe for everyone. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible tales from the world of aviation. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.